Ooh, this pack is good. You may remember that a few months ago we took a look at the Dramatic Capture Series Nemesis Bridge 3-pack, and I was a little bit mixed on it. On the one hand, it had characters that I was missing from my Generations collection, including some very, very good molds. One dud, but oh well. But it spiced all three of them up with some excellent, decadent paint. However, the build quality across some of the figures was more than a little compromised. Shockwave was fine, crunchy ratchets, that's about it. But Soundwave and Megatron? Oof. Yikes. So, when Takara revealed their second pack and it had two molds that I was already very familiar with, it was a little bit less enticing for me. But still, something ended up drawing me to it, whether it was the Teletraan I, the colours on the Optimus, or, I don't know, that. So I placed a pre-order, and I am very glad that I did, because the Dramatic Capture Series Autobot Headquarters is a fantastic set, and it carries few to no issues from the previous. Well, mostly. So, starting with Jazz, because I really have the least to say about him, this is a pretty good looking figure. I wasn't really a big lover of the 86 Jazz mold until I got the Autobot 5-pack, and for me, this version sits halfway between my love for that one and the original. But still, I can say that the sculpted detail and proportions on this figure are fantastic. This thing is very much a G1 Jazz, but it has some of the qualities of the later interpretations, like the Movieverse and Fall of Cybertron version. What I mean is he's got all of those classic details and designs, but he's also jacked. The wide shoulder line, slimmed down waist, and bell-bottom boots, which I intentionally mistransformed because they look way better like this. The stocky but somehow limber limbs, and this absolutely fantastic head sculpt. I just can't not love this thing. Of course, it's not a perfect mold. The backs of the shins, the forearms, they're a little hollow. The backpack could be a little bit egregious depending on how you look at it. Personally, I think it's absolutely fine. It's very animation accurate. Although there are other problems with it, which, yeah, if you know the history of this mold, you know what to expect. But you know, I've never looked at this thing and thought, wow, this is under-engineered. I still don't understand why I was indifferent to the 86 version when it came out. Also, gotta mention, love the fact that it uses the wing as heels. Very clever. I don't think I mentioned it last time. But yeah, I have talked about this mold before, so let's get on to what people are actually here to hear about with this thing. The paint. This paint scheme is very, very good, but I don't think I prefer it to the Autobot 5-pack version. I like that thing's dark blues, I like the glossy grey rather than the silver. That one does it for me a little bit more, but still, this Dramatic Capture version is very, very good. It feels an awful lot more like an upgraded version of the 86 one's paint scheme. The white is kind of a little bit creamy and muted, the black is completely pitch, and those are about the only two molded colours you get on this guy. But so many of the little molded details are picked out in paint. I count 3 distinct shades of blue on this guy. There's a very pale blue for the lights, the eyes, and the shin stripes. Of course, they used a darker blue for the main stripe on the chest and the back, although I do wish that extended further up on the chest like the 5-pack version. But then there's a different blue for the bits on the hips. It's a little bit more saturated and bright. That's a really neat touch. The pops of red on the bumper and the stripes are nice and bright, and I feel that they finally nailed the width of the red stripe. That's nice. Too wide on the original, too thin on this one. Perfect here. And that aside, all the little pops of silver that you get are just nice and cleanly applied. Very simple. This doesn't pop like the previous version, it's not quite as vibrant, but it does look absolutely fantastic on its own. And the paint apps that he does have over the original 86 version just lift him up that much more. Accessory wise, Jazz just has the one. It's the same pistol he's always had, and as always it's completely painted in silver. It looks pretty nice in hand, and it can plug in the back if you wanted to. Well, in theory. A little loose on mine. Now, this mold poses pretty well, but it does have a couple of limitations. The head is on a very good ball joint with a lot of wiggle room, very expressive. The shoulders can move out decently far and go all the way around. He has bicep swivels, standard elbows, a waist swivel. The hips are a little limited going out and forward and back. That's a shame. If only Hasbro Transformers had shifting hips. He has thigh swivels that can be a little bit clashy around the crotch plate. Pretty reasonable knees that stay tabbed in on this version, thank god. And some very good ankle pivots. The posability on this figure is pretty good. It's not gonna blow your mind. If you expect that of this thing, you're probably going to be disappointed. The limitations at the hips are a shame, the lack of wrists, I don't mind. And the shoulders are mounted kind of low, so if you bring the arms forward and out, they look a little bit odd. But I don't really mind that, and he can still look pretty dynamic thanks to the sculpt. But there is one key thing that I do have concerns about with this guy. The clear plastic backpack on the original was very brittle. It did crack on mine, and with the stress and how tight the backpack is on this one, I could see that happening with this thing, especially during the transformation. So, if you get this thing, handle it with extreme care. However, that transformation is a lot of fun. Aside from shitting yourself around the backpack region, there's quite a bit of pretty clever engineering here. I love the way that the shoulders flip inwards, the intricate steps so you can get the head panel flipped around, that little waist rotation, little things like that just lift this transformation up an awful lot more and make it feel a lot more involved and complicated than it is, but still, seating that clear plastic, it's not fun. I do have a suggestion for the reverse transformation, which is to open up the legs like this, and then bring it up from these portions as I do. You're putting on awful lot less stress on the tabs and hinges that way. But now that we have the car all put together, this thing is very good. This is probably, in my opinion, the best this car mode has ever looked. As much as I like the 5-pack version, those opaque windows didn't work 100% for it, but here, the clear windows, as much as they shit me up, they're a little bit gorgeous. I love how concise and consistent the white is across this mode. No random black strips where they missed the paint on this guy. The black on the wing has practically a mirror shine. All of the colours in the paint are so cleanly applied, it looks absolutely fantastic. Things like the thinner sun strip or the grille being silver, they just pick it up for me a lot more than the previous version. These things are currently on display with my Siege Omega on his little perch, and I do enjoy displaying him in car mode. And this Jazz figure overall, absolutely brilliant, but I am still very concerned about that clear plastic. Like, the plastics that they've used across the rest of this guy feel amazing. He's a lot denser than the 5-pack version, but after my only ever instance that I can remember of clear plastic cracking on me, I'm always going to be a little bit wary of the backpack on this guy. That aside though, brilliant. Teletraan I, however, isn't quite such a satisfying package, because in robot mode, yeah, this thing's a little rough. Now, this is a repaint of a pack-in accessory of the Kingdom Arc, so I'm not going to judge it too harshly as its own figure. The robot mode is very much the last priority of this guy, and the main priorities were 1, fitting him in the Arc, and 2, turning him into a wall. I will judge the QC a little. Now, the design of this guy is a pretty fun homage. This is very clearly Action Master mainframe and a Teletraan cosplay. The deep cut references from the Kingdom Arc are insane. And as kibbly as this thing clearly is, and encumbered as it is, the actual robot parts do look pretty nice. The sculpted detail for the torso, the thighs, and the arms is absolutely breathtaking. This, in my opinion, is over-detailing done right. If you squint, you can't really see a lot of the sculpted detailing, but you look in closely, and this thing is just covered in mechanical detail, cyber greebling, vents. The arms are like a techno crossword puzzle. The chest is covered in details and really resembles that original Action Master figure. And the head, flawless, 10 out of 10. Light piping's nice as well. I love the shape, the detail, everything about it is just spot on to me. But as for the sculpt, that's as much as I can gush, because unfortunately, I gotta mention the kibble. The shins are enormous, bulky, and hollow. The backpack is absolutely enormous and drapes so low. Now, for what this originally was, I wouldn't mind this, if not for the forearms. These are what tipped me over the edge into this thing being too encumbered by the kibble, because the way that they are supposed to sit means you can't really use the arms at all. Somehow, they are clashing and encumbered when he is standing completely straight. Figure that one out. For what this is trying to do, it kinda needs to have this much kibble unless it's going to be over-engineered and covered in hinges in the Teletraan mode. And that is very much the main mode that you're supposed to have with this guy. The robot mode is a secondary homage, but the arms move so little and he is so encumbered. But we will get into that right after we go over the colours, cause gorgeous. Now, ignoring the orange for a second, because that is very much for the other mode, and also, it's arc orange, you know what it looks like, and it does it pretty well. But the sculpted red, the greys, the blue, it's all so deep and vibrant. It's a little desaturated, but in a really, really good way. It's probably the best thing that this robot mode has going for it, other than that head sculpt. And the pops of paint are fantastic too. Those little bits of orange on the waist, that little pan on the chest. It's basically all you get aside from the Teletraan stuff in the other mode, but it's kind of all you need here. And overall, the colours here just, they work really, really well. Much needed improvement over the all yellow version that came with the Arc. Now, before we get into the posability, he does have one accessory. There's a little probe explorer thing. It's a pretty neat nod. It's got some nice sculpted detail. There's fairly clean paint on it. I kind of like this desaturated brushed silver look. The wings can move up and down, but other than that, there's not really too much this thing can do, aside from storing inside mainframe. Opening up the chest reveals a little port, and you can just fold up the wings and stick it on in there and hide it away forever. It also doesn't have to come out for transformation. Lovely. Now, as for the articulation on this guy, this is where we get into problems. The head can only swivel, and the peg it's on, very, very loose. That is a big problem. The arms can move out, and they can only just go up because of the backpack, and arm panels, very clashy. He's got bicep swivels, standard elbows, very tight waist swivel that is encumbered because of the backpack. Hips can go out pretty decently and they can only go forward. He has thigh swivels, pretty reasonable knees, and very, very tight ankle pivots. Yeah, the posing here ain't the best. He's got everything he needs to, but the backpack, the arm kibble, just get in the way far, far, far too much. I wish I could say there was a way that you could remove the backpack in order to have the figure be a little bit less encumbered, but unfortunately, the arms are mounted onto it, so no chance. What a shame. Transformation on Teletraan is pretty simple, it's mostly unfurling him and just aligning him upright, but there is something that becomes very evident to me throughout this. The orange plastic is very, very thin. It makes the transformation feel a little bit rickety, and it makes the Teletraan mode feel a little bit rickety, unfortunately. That's not the most satisfying thing in the world. Fortunately for this pack, the actual Teletraan mode looks great. It's absolutely covered in all sorts of sculpted detail, and it shines so well in this orange plastic. I'm not going to pretend it looks absolutely flawless. There's a couple of hinges that break up the sculpt that are a shame, but they've kind of been worked into the design to look like power conduits, and I can appreciate that. My absolute favourite thing here are all the printed details. All of the little diagrams, the charts, the little imager mainframe, the arc, little sensor readings, they are all over this thing and they look absolutely breathtaking. There's so much detail in all of the line work and it's so cleanly applied. This right here is what I was most excited for. But I do have one other complaint with this mode. It's very small. Now, I wouldn't mind this thing being small, but like, this is it next to Jazz and Optimus. Optimus towers over it. Jazz is about the same height, maybe a little bit shorter. I feel like Teletraan should be a little bit bigger. The figures shouldn't have to lean down to be able to reach the console. This is more like a mini-boss scale Teletraan. But still, despite all the problems that I have, I quite like it. My whole plan for this guy was just to keep him in Teletraan mode forever, and aside from that loose head and the thin plastic on the shins, he feels pretty good. I'd take him over DCS Megatron any day. But he's not the best figure from that pack. That goes to Optimus Prime. Now, if you have eyes and you've been in the franchise for more than, say, a year, you'll probably recognize that this is Earthrise Optimus Prime. I wouldn't be hard-pressed to say that this is probably the most reused and repainted G1-style Optimus in the last decade. And you know what? Having a refreshed version in plastics this nice is doing something for me. Now, the sculpted details on this figure have always been good. The mold is one of the shining examples of early Earthrise where they still had a lot of the greebling from Siege, but they were implementing a bit more of a G1 style design. And because of that, the surfaces are all absolutely packed. This feels like a very realised version of Optimus. If you're not a huge fan of the very simplistic look of 86 Optimus, then this will probably be the figure for you. And there are some things that I do really like about this design in particular. The thinner windows are a very interesting look to me, they kind of make me think of a younger Optimus. I've always loved the shins on this particular mold, with the wheels just hanging out there, and I still think that this is one of the best Optimus heads of all time. It kind of feels anime influenced. As far as I'm concerned, this is my Studio Trigger Prime from this moment, and that anime influence does persist to the proportions. Mostly by way of, f*** me, he's got long legs. It's up to you if this is a pro or a con in your books. With my original Earthrise Optimus, I went in and out of phases of loving the look and being a little bit put off by the length of the legs, but I will say the colour consistency across all the joints where it was grey on the original Earthrise figure do tie it together and make the proportions look a little bit more solid on this version. And speaking of the colours, these might be the best colours on any Optimus figure I own. As much as I love the brightness and the vibrance of the 86 version, there's something special here. Now crucially, he's got white legs. For me, that's a big thing with Optimus designs, and he pulls it off perfectly. And while the red and the blue are very saturated, they're not very bright, which I think kind of makes him a little bit more matured looking. There's almost like a velvety quality to the colours here. They're really, really nice. I also think they strike a perfect balance of showing off the detail while not letting them overcomplicate the sculpt. And the paint apps, they're exactly what I want out of this guy. The Earthrise figure had a lot of silver around the chest, which did rub off very quickly for me just from opening the Matrix chamber, things like that. And without that, the blue from the windows shines that much more. The orange on the lights and the yellow on the crotch, they're both beautifully applied. The Tampograph pinstripe Autobot badge on the shoulder looks absolutely gorgeous. But I think the biggest thing here is having a slightly dark desaturated silver. It's present on the toes, the smokestacks, the waist and the head, a few parts where the detail goes a lot harder. And because of that darkness of the silver, it doesn't overcrowd the detail, and that shines more than the metallic does. Don't get me wrong, I still think that 86 Optimus is the best looking G1 Optimus in mainline, but this guy definitely takes it for colour. Now, accessory-wise, there's no trailer in sight, hallelujah. Instead, you get the rifle in all black. It looks pretty nice. I think the black definitely devours some of the detail. I would have maybe appreciated some silver on the buttstock, but overall, not too bad. It looks pretty nice in his hand, and if you don't want him holding it, you can fold it in half and plug it on the back. And I'm very glad to say that this thing is not floppy like my Earthrise version. This thing clicks into place in both the open and closed modes. Aside from that rifle, the only other accessory you get for this guy is the Matrix of Leadership stored in the chest. It's a little difficult to get out, but it's the same Matrix that we've gotten with this mold forever, just with a really, really nice shade of blue. Love that gunmetal paint in the Matrix chamber though. Now, colors aside, probably the best thing that this Optimus has going for it is the posing. The head is on a pretty good ball joint with a decent amount of wiggle room. The shoulders go out standardly and all the way around. There's bicep swivels, standard elbows. There's wrist swivels, opening hands. He has a waist swivel, which is a little limited by the backpack. The hips can go out pretty well. Backward not so well, but forward all the way. He's got thigh swivels, very deep knees, and some pretty decent ankle pivots. The posing here is very solid. He's a very expressive figure, very limber, and those extremely deep knees help a lot. Unfortunately, the more you pose this guy, the longer the legs look, but you can get around that pretty well. And he's a lot of fun to handle, especially thanks to the gorgeous plastics they used here. This is not the best feeling figure that I've gotten this year, that still goes to 86 Blaster, but this thing is probably in second or third place. The plastic is really rigid and it feels super nice. Ever handled Kingdom Rodimus? It feels a lot like that. And every single one of the joints on my copy is perfectly toleranced. Nothing feels uneven, nothing feels too loose or too tight. He's super satisfying to mess with. With all the stop motion experience I have with this mold, but in these tolerances, this would probably be the perfect Optimus Prime for a stop motion animator. Now, the transformation on this figure is a bit of a classic. The legs are a little bit under-engineered, they don't do very much, and that is a shame. But the torso, the way that it all accordions out and comes together very smoothly, those extra flaps on the flanks, it is all extremely satisfying, and I can't help but notice that the gas tanks on the thighs are a lot more solid than the other versions of this figure that I've handled, which is a nice plus. And the truck mode is a classic in my books. Now, by no means do I mean it's the cleanest one in the world. The gaps around the gas tanks are a little bit ugly, the gap in the back is even worse, and I do think that 86 has a better truck mode overall, but I still think that the mechanical detail on the cab here is the best we've ever seen. I love all the rivets, the panels, the lines, the slight slope of the windows. Those wheels are fantastic. I'm a big fan of the grille, although I do prefer the taller one from the 86 figure. The headlights for me remain undefeated. I love the silver painted sculpting behind the clear plastic inserts. That looks absolutely fantastic in my books. And the cohesion with the paint is a nice touch. I do appreciate an Optimus without the cab stripe as well. That looks really good here. But it ain't flawless. As mentioned, there's a couple of gaps here and there that are a little ugly, but also the smokestacks are very short, and crucially, the truck bed doesn't like to sit flat. It's not a huge issue, and it's nowhere near as prevalent as it was on my original version of the figure, but it's still a problem. And while it's not my favourite Optimus truck, nor my favourite Optimus figure, this thing does stand pretty high in the pantheon of G1 Optimus Primes for me. And overall, I am very, very happy that I picked up this pack in the end. You know, I had my pre-order down for this guy for a long while, and when I got my hands on 86 Optimus, that kind of made me want to cancel it, because the main thing that I wanted this for, beyond the Teletraan I, was that Optimus in those colours. And I thought that that void would be filled, but this thing, it scratches a very particular itch for me. You know, none of these figures are going to be going on my main G1 Autobot display, and instead they're going to be able to stand alone and shine for what they are, which is, in actuality, a huge step up from the previous pack. With the first pack, I gave it an apprehensive recommend, but in retrospect, I probably wouldn't. I was mainly thinking about the fact that I had the representations of those characters then. But this pack, I would recommend very wholeheartedly. It's a little bit expensive for what you're paying, it's a premium import product, it's got more paint than usual. I'd honestly say that the first pack is a lot better value for money. Teletraan I aside, who is not the best thing in the world, like, he's serviceable, but he's not as good as I hoped he would be. This pack is really good. You know, the Jazz is a very good figure in some very, very nice paint, but the Optimus, absolutely fantastic. If you're not willing to shell out for an 86 Optimus but really want to get the definitive G1 Generations Prime, this might be your best bet to go for. Yes, you're not getting a trailer, but the rest of the figure more than compensates in my book, and you're also getting two other figures for that value. You know, it's not exactly a budget pack, but I feel like I've got my money's worth. And if you agree that this pack is worthwhile, then leave a like down below. And if you don't, please comment why not. It is a bit of a hefty price tag for a Voyager and two Deluxes. And if you do want a decent evaluation of some things that are a little bit better value for money, well...
Look! Same shit all over again.
Just subscribe and tune in next week. It's a biggin'.